All right, switching gears now, we continue our conversation on Ferguson. In the wake of the Ferguson protest and shooting and the violence there, police departments across America are trying to build trust with the African-American communities, holding meetings, fielding questions, letting the African-American community know that they feel their anger, understand their anger. Joining me this time from Washington, D.C. to comment on this is legal analyst and Project 21 co-chair, Horace Cooper. Horace, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Horace Cooper, let me ask what some might call a very controversial question. Instead of police departments holding town meetings, town halls, and trying to build outreach to the black community communities across America to build trust, should they not be holding town hall meetings and saying, look, here's what happens when someone, no matter what color they are, punches a police officer after robbing a convenience store?
Well, there's no question that there's a process that's taking place here that seems to be reinventing the law enforcement role 101. I haven't a conflict or a complaint about law enforcement generally sitting down with the communities where they police and having conversations. What I have a complaint about, and it's exactly as you identified, there's this impression before all the facts are in that the only reason that this conflict and incident happened in Ferguson is because there hasn't been the right kind of conversation between law enforcement and the community. The truth of the matter is, if you have a community that engages in law-abiding activities, generally speaking, you don't see any kinds of conflicts like this. And in fact, the truth of the matter is, in America today, there are fewer than 500 shooting deaths by law enforcement communities nationwide a year. It's not the case that we don't say that we are happy that there are 500, but in a nation of over 300 million, you have to really ask yourself, is the problem in America law enforcement shootings? That's the big complaint and the big issue. And when you want to break it down, even of that less than 500, the number is actually closer to 400 than it is to 5, fewer than 150 of them are law enforcement officers involving white officers and black individuals that have been shot by the police officers. So again, I'm open to the idea that law enforcement can, anytime it wants to, sit down with its communities where they operate and have conversations. But as you point out, law enforcement 101, don't shoot at the officer, don't wrestle with the officer, don't engage in lawbreaking, and it's going to be really, really hard to actually meet up with a law enforcement officer.
Horace Cooper, that's a very eye-opening and interesting statistic that you just shared with us. 150 white-on-black police officer shootings in America, less than 500 police shootings in America overall. We just had on the Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson prior to you. I'm not sure if you know the Reverend or not, but he brought up a very provocative point that I hadn't thought of. I'd like to get your take on this because I think it's an important one personally. He said, look, the fact that we are now addressing this post-Ferguson event the way we are, with celebrating, you know, the funeral with celebrities from not Hollywood, but celebrities, the Al Sharptons or the Jesse Jacksons, the White House, the police forces focusing on the communities as opposed to focusing on what went wrong in this case. His concern is it is going to send a detrimental message to young black youth across America who may be growing up in broken homes, who may be growing up in disadvantaged circumstances. It is sending the wrong message that crime is okay because white America is against you.
Well, that's been a concern that we at Project 21 have had for a while, is that there are people in America, black, white, or brown, who are developing resentment. Much of that, not all of it, much of that is because of the economic squeeze that we've been experiencing. A lot of people are not aware that other than the Great Depression, this economic squeeze is the longest period we've ever experienced. The last one that we went through, by the way, was from 1999 to early 2001. It was a very, very modest one, and the government took some of the types of steps that corrected it. It appears that we've taken the types of steps that have exacerbated it. And there are a lot of Americans, black, white, or brown, who feel that squeeze, and it's developing resentment. The lesson that's being created by much of what's happening in Ferguson is A, that the problem and the resentment should be focused on racial animus. That's a false explanation. And secondly, that it's okay in some instances to use criminality as a way to express that resentment. You don't get a free DVD because you believe the officer or the law enforcement community or the governor of your state is in some way an unjustified victor in your community, taking operation in a way that perhaps he should. The response to that is to enter into the political arena, is to develop personal capital, is to take productive steps that get you to a point where you're financially independent. So I would argue that there's resentment that people like Al Sharpton and Benjamin Crump and Jesse Jackson encourage and stoke. And when I watched the funeral, instead of allowing a family to grieve over the loss of their child, what I saw were people taking opportunities to tell people a bad idea, and that is that America's bad and it's okay for you to act bad in response.
I think you've put it very well. What next in light of the Michael Brown shooting? A grand jury, of course, is examining the evidence to determine if the officer will be charged. What do you believe is going to be the next shoe to drop? Are we in for some more bad news, more violence, more social upheaval?
Well, what I'm concerned about is we already had the governor say that we need a vigorous prosecution before the grand jury heard one bit of information. You've got a couple of state senators that are saying that if we don't get an indictment, you're going to see a riot like you haven't seen before. And by the way, the riots that we saw in Ferguson early were frightfully scary in terms of the destructiveness that they represented. And we're hearing from people like Malik Shabazz that say the only outcome of any investigation is an indictment that leads to a death penalty. That, to me, sets people up with an impression of what to expect. And I don't know that we have the evidence yet to show that. We had a rush to judgment in Sanford with the Trayvon Martin case. You had a rush to judgment in North Carolina with the Duke lacrosse case.
That's right.
We're having situations where the media and some subset of America are given a false impression of where things are. I want to take a breath, relax a little bit, and give a chance to see where the evidence actually takes us. Now, I want to make a quick point, and that is, people are saying, okay, a lot of the folks in Ferguson are now doing that. I think it's more likely the case that a lot of the real troublemakers are still sitting in jail waiting for bond, and that's been more of a reason for things calming down than that the people in the community of Ferguson have somehow come together. I think if we continue to allow those people, the ones that have already been arrested multiple times, to be free to run and do the kinds of things and create the kind of mayhem that they want to do, yes, that is what worries me as far as the next shoe to drop.
Final question, Horace Cooper. A recent Pew Research poll has come out and said that among those African-American registered voters who were polled, they believe that race relations in America today is worse under President Barack Obama than before he was in office. Now, I was someone who did not vote for President Barack Obama either time, but I did believe, the first time he was elected, I did believe it would be ultimately a good thing for race relations in America. I felt that it would have more African Americans feeling as if they were more enrolled in our political process, if they could look to someone and said, look, he became the highest, most powerful man in America. What is your reaction to the fact that those African Americans polled say, wait, things are worse off in the country today?
Well, you can't mismanage the economy and hurt the American people, and in the case of black Americans, they've been hurt actually even more. More loss of capital equity, home value destruction, more loss of hope for future retirement plans, their kids going to school. That's clearly been the consequence of the effort of this administration. The president campaigned in 2008 and promised to offer a post-racial administration as a president. It turns out, I think either the teleprompter didn't have the right words or he misspoke. What he was actually saying was he was promising the most racial administration or presidency, and that's what we've seen. You had a shooting take place in Salt Lake City where a black police officer gunned down a 20-year-old white unarmed individual. There has been no effort on the part of the Justice Department to rush over. There's been no call from anyone in the administration to
I have to rudely interrupt you in the interest of time and leave it right there. I appreciate your comments. They're right to the point, and thank you for joining us. Horace Cooper from Project 21.